Hello and welcome to 73 and Sunny, the podcast about the journey of getting things just right. We talk to tech sales and marketing leaders about how they're growing, dialing in best practices, and getting closer to that sweet spot. Today, we're happy to have Jonathan Hafemann join us. Jonathan is the VP of Commercialization and Growth for Next Energy Technologies, a deep tech solar technology startup that is building coatings and equipment to transform windows into solar assets. Jonathan has been a revenue leader for more than 12 years across 4 different startups and has an abundance of knowledge surrounding market structure, sales, and business development strategies. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jonathan.
Thanks, Damon. It's great to be here.
So let's start with Next Energy Technologies, and what the heck are coatings?
Yeah, so these are coatings specifically for windows. So the idea is that we're developing a coating that you can see through it, so it's transparent. But when the sun's hitting it, it'll generate energy for the building. So just think of it as like a transparent solar cell that you can integrate into a window. And the idea is that the underlying technology is going to enable us to turn the facade of a highly glazed commercial building into a solar asset. So we can leverage both the vision area and the what's called the spandrel area, which is the glass that sits in between floors. It just kind of covers up the concrete nobody wants to see, and turn those into energy, clean energy producing assets for the building.
Okay, so I know that one of the big parts about or the big limitations of capturing solar is just real estate, is just the amount of a volume of where you can actually put solar panels, because right now it's just on roofs typically. But what you're doing is multiplying that by a factor, right? To be able to say, hey, listen, we're not just talking about all these roofs. We're talking about the sides. We're talking about awnings. We're talking about any part that might be facing the sun.
That's correct. So yeah, so we're basically saying, hey, rooftop solar is great. We're not competing with rooftop solar. Anywhere you can put rooftop solar, you can and should do that if your goal is to build an efficient building that's as close to net zero as possible. Just the reality is that the further up you build, the higher your building goes, the ratio of energy you can generate from your rooftop space relative to the total square footage of a building just gets worse and worse. And so you need more and more assets to be able to add to that clean energy generation equation that's going to help you get closer and closer to net zero. So we're looking to be a part of that solution.
Okay, got it. And I know that there's a ton of investment going into windows and window treatments. I've seen the clickers on those conference room windows that make everything opaque, and then you turn them back on and you can see through. Is this what is the technology with this? Is this like I know you're talking about a coating, but I believe those are using like electricity to be able to actually make everything opaque, or some of them are actually a mask, like a clear mask that would then become opaque. What is the
Yeah, so there's a couple frontiers of, I would say, new glass technology. So right now, like the challenge with glass is that when it comes to the energy efficiency of a building, you're way better off having a wall than you are having glass, right? Walls are going to be a lot more efficient, and you're going to be able to heat and cool and maintain that building a lot more efficiently with a wall. Problem is, everybody wants views. Everybody wants to be able to enjoy the view out their building, and everybody wants 10 feet of floor to ceiling glass. And so those two, the choice between those two has historically been at odds. And so where the future of glass technologies is going is actually to be able to maintain that transparency and outperform a wall. And so there's kind of there's two aspects to, I would say, performance inside of a window. There's what's called the heat gain coefficient, or the heat gain management. So that's sun's energy coming in and wanting to radiate into the building. And then there's the other factor, is the insulating value, or the R value of the building. So that's basically like when you're you're heating the building on the two it's cold outside, how much heat is escaping through the window. And so there's basically two major categories, 4 technologies, 2 in each category, that are pushing the envelope of performance forward to where in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be no trade-off between choosing glass or choosing a wall. You will
Hmm.
have all the performance of a wall with all of the benefits and transparency of glass, at your disposal. So buildings should be getting a lot more efficient while maintaining their desirability from an aesthetics, a performance, and occupant experience standpoint.
That is very cool. And I know I live in San Jose, and we have southern facing walls and windows, and we spend a ton on air conditioning. So that would be great to be able to have a little bit better R rating and a little bit better experience there. Is this something that you're envisioning for both commercial and for residential solutions?
We're still exploring the residential market. I would say for sure commercial, no question. Commercial is a great first fit. There's a lot of reasons from tax incentives perspective, from a capabilities perspective within the channel of people to be able to manage the kind of the complexity and added cost that comes with a window that has wires and that can hook up to standard solar components to create power that goes into a building. That's a complex thing to manage. On the residential side, where we're seeing an opportunity is around what we're calling enabling functions. So where we can generate enough power to charge a battery that then does something that isn't native to a window right now. And so that could be something like a window that you can then program with your phone to move up and down at a certain time of the day. It could be a window that enables a function like smart like privacy glass that you click a button and it switches state. It could be something that's enabling like solar powered garage doors, right? Just these different things that today have to be powered, or you have to either run wires to the edge of the building. So in a retrofit scenario, that's almost economically a no go
Mm-hmm.
right at the gate. Um, and so the folks that we've talked to on the residential side see the opportunity. The biggest portion of the residential window market is retrofit, hands down. And so if you can figure out how to get something that both self generates power and provides some new functionality that doesn't currently exist in the market, then you're kind of in a sweet spot, and that's the direction we're headed with our solutions.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's good to know, and I think that goes along with, hey, if you're just focused on commercial right now, or know that that's a great place to start. That goes along with what you've written about in the past in terms of product market fit above all else, right? And so it's product market fit. Hey, if it's not residential right now, it's commercial, but product market fit. Talk to us a little bit about product market fit and why you feel that is the paramount of all considerations in terms of either starting a business or going to market in terms of a strategy.
Well, I've kind of lived this, I would say, in a real positive way and a real negative way. I've experienced it both on both sides. And my first startup that I worked at in Lunera, and in the startups that I've been a part of, I've always come in at the when a product's been developed and they're ready to scale, right? They need to figure out. There's like, hey, we've developed this thing. We think we know where it fits in the market, but we need to figure out how to sell it, how to sell it, and where it's going to go. And so at Lunera, Lunera was making a transition. They were a company that had been making custom LED light fixtures primarily for Apple. So they were doing all of Apple's like their in-store experiences. So they were making the logo and all the backlighting. And this was kind of pre-Apple Watch, so the lighting looked a lot different in their
Mm,
stores at that time. And they basically figured out like, hey, this was a business that we developed, because we needed revenue, but it wasn't a business that was going to scale. Custom
mm,
designed fixtures was not a scalable business. And the whole LED market was sort of trending towards, volume and scalability, which is really what the lighting market's built on. And so they developed this novel retrofit lamp that I would say went a little bit ahead of where the market was at in terms of like focusing on a category that didn't have the broadest install base, but it was a part of the market that they could take ownership on. And we built a brand, and we basically launched this retrofit lamp business that would allow us to pull out an existing lamp and then use the same kind of underlying infrastructure, plug in an LED lamp that would save energy and garner incentives and like, have a much longer lifetime, sort of a really clear value proposition. And that business scaled really quickly. So we took that business from the retrofit lamp business from 0 to 40 million in about 4 years. And we saw
Wow.
really, really rapid growth with that, for a hardware based solution. And amidst that, the price fell dramatically. I mean, almost 75% from where it started. And so, the volume had to just continue to ratchet up, right, as prices
Sure.
fall and to continue to grow our top line. And that worked. That worked really well. That was a great example of having product market fit, uh, getting traction and start scaling revenue. On the other side for me, where I lived a lot of pain was in the smart glass industry. My last role with a company called Halio. I've been in. This is my fourth. Next is my fourth startup. The other three have just completely gone away. So, and all of them went way over 10 million in revenue. So, um, you there's a lot to learn, right? About revenue is not your only it's not your only opportunity for things to go sideways. So at Halio, what I learned, I'm actually publishing an article on this tomorrow about just the lack of product market fit with the solution. And the glazing market, I learned a lot, is a very risk sensitive market. It's basically the last place you want to have a problem if you're building a building, because
Hmm.
now you got to cut a hole in the building, you got to get a crane out there. Glass is heavy. It's labor intensive to manage and install. And if you have a tenant in a building and you're the owner of the building, like the last thing you want to do is tell your tenant, "Hey, we got to cut a hole in your building today," and uh, maybe don't come in, right? uh, so that's a really disruptive kind of thing, and it's really tends to be the last place people are willing to take risks on the edge of a building. So it's a very risk sensitive market. Bringing a new technology into that space, I learned a lot. It was a big education, both in terms of the structure of that market, the kind of where the risk sensitivities were, how you could sell something like that in that kind of environment. Um, and I basically figured out that everybody that was competing for dollars in the space to trying to bring this smart glass, which was basically a switchable. It was kind of like what you're describing, where it's like it goes opaque, but it's for
Yeah.
exteriors, right? So that white glass you see in a conference room where you hit a button and it switches on and off, that's only used for use in interiors. It can't stand up to the UV and IR heat that the sun brings. So we developed one that was for managing heat gain and the outside of a building. So all that to say, that product was overpriced. It had too much risk, and the underlying economics were not there. The underlying manufacturing economics were not there to drive the price down at kind of the volumes that we were able to sell at. And so that was an example of a business that collectively there's three companies that really made a push to commercialize smart glass. Two of them combined raised about $2.5 billion over about 12 to 13 years.
Wow.
And one of them's completely gone. The other one's bankrupt and, will be gone soon. And that's an example of where product market fit um, was not there. And they were able to somehow convince investors that,
Yeah.
that they could get it there, that everything else was going to work out. We just needed more money. That was not the case. It was far from it. So, in my mind, that's the kind of investment opportunity that only comes around when you're at zero or near zero interest rates, and
Hmm.
there's too much money in circulation and not enough quality opportunities or assets to buy. Like, I don't know how else that happens, because the business model never made sense to me.
Well, that's scary, right? That is, I mean, it's scarier than looking over a hole in your building 30 floors up, but it's like, this is the business that is, probably going to be, falling. But it is the risk tolerance of either what you're talking about, investors or the founders or the executive team there. I don't have that kind of risk tolerance. Like, what you're on your fourth, and you just talked about, hey, some wins, some successes, and some failures. Like, what is to you since this is 73 and sunny, we're trying to get to that sweet spot. What is that sweet spot in risk for you? Because without risk, there's not going to be a lot of payoff, right? There's something has to be, you have to go over your skis a little bit. So what is that sweet spot for you in terms of risk when you're thinking about a product market fit, you're thinking of starting a company? Well, what is that? What do you weigh when you're looking at that risk?
So for me, what I figured out is there's people are good at different stages and different life cycles of a business. I'm not good at 0 to 1. I don't like the whole, like, let's take an idea and then let's build something around it and let's grind for 24 months without any pay and just try to bring something out of nothing. I'm not good at that. That's
Mm,
not my sweet spot. My sweet spot is I'm actually really good at taking your your concept, your idea that's been developed and that has been kind of validated in the market, and then scaling, getting I would say getting to scalability on the revenue side. So that actually is really my sweet spot, and that's where I've spent a lot of time. It goes back to figuring out, like, in my time at Lunera, I figured this out when I looked up one day in about year 4, and I realized I was doing a job I would have never applied for. Like, this job of, like, basically my channel was established, I had revenue growing, I had all the things that like any salesman would want, right? Great customer base and a good brand, and I was bored out of my mind. It was not the right fit for me, that stage of scaling growth. I realized the fun part for me was actually building that process, building trust, establishing the channel, finding the right players in the market, getting tuning the strategy, understanding what the knobs were to pull. Once I got those things dialed in and revenue was growing and you just needed to kind of keep doing more of the same, I was bored
mm,
and it was not a fit for me. So, um, you know, I'm not 0 to 1, but I'm more like 1 to 5 or something, whatever those kind of intermediate steps are in growing a business. Um, but man, if those things aren't right, like if the underlying conditions aren't right, it can be so painful that I mean, I spent a year after Haleo. I mean, it was so bad. Um, I was in so much pain. I got fired from that job because I went to the board of directors and lobbied for them to replace the CEO because I was so, he and I were so diametrically opposed to each other in terms of our, like, strategy and approach and all these things. It was like either it needed to be him or me. Like, one of us needed to go. In the end, both of us ended up leaving, and then the company cratered. But the you know the um, for me, that was like when I really started seriously reevaluating the risks I was taking and the reward potential of it. And that was when I spent a year really going down the path of entrepreneurship through acquisition. I internalized the idea. I'm not good at 0 to 1. I don't like that early startup phase, but I could take something that somebody else had put in motion and I could grow it, right?
mm,
And so the idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition, the ETA movement that's been happening the last few years, really appealed to me. And my wife and I, we sold our house. We took the equity in that house and we spent a year going after it. And I spent, but offers in on 3 different deals. Nothing panned out. But I was very clear about, what was a good fit and what wasn't, and where I was going to be able to have traction and success. And I'm still open to going back down that path. I still think that's probably the sweet spot for me in terms of risk and reward, is where I can apply my skill set, see the upside, but I don't have to I don't have to worry about, you know, what percentage of the cap table do I have? Who votes ahead of me? How many people are or how much am I going to get diluted on the next round? Like, none of that, all that goes away, right?
mhm.
If I own the business, even if I have investors, to help me take down a deal that's maybe larger than what my personal balance sheet can handle, that's fine, as long as there's clarity around, like, where my ownership stake is and what's required for me to grow. I can leverage that down the road for the next deal and keep rolling up portfolio companies. That's probably the long term. That's probably where my sweet spot is.
Thanks for sharing that. In terms of the sales strategy, so it's not in the creation, but it is the building, is what you're saying, building the revenue, building maybe the process, building the sales strategy, because we have a lot of listeners who are part of the sales strategy or the go-to-market strategy mindset. What lessons do you have for them in terms of looking at a sales strategy, how to attack a market that is nascent or has some risk to it?
Yeah, I mean that's going to vary by market, of course, and certainly if you're doing hardware versus software. But I think for me, when I looked at on the hardware side, I can speak to that really clearly, which is really just understanding the structure of the market is really important, and then the potential for the technology to disrupt the existing players, and if you play it forward far enough, trying to figure out who wins and who loses, or who's going to get squeezed by the introduction of a new technology. And this was something that I have to give a lot of credit to my longtime boss, Tom Quinn. Tom's a brilliant big picture thinker, tremendous communicator. He's a natural salesman. You walk in the room and Tom like lights up the room, and he can tell a story that has everybody captivated, and really tie in strategy and leadership. He's got the whole package from a revenue leader perspective. And working for Tom for about 8 years, really he really took my thinking when I would say a natural thinker in the 10 to 20,000 foot range, and he was a natural thinker in like the 40 to 50,000 foot range. And we would just over the course of 7 or 8 years of working for him, he kept lifting the lid on my thinking over
Mm.
time, and taught me how to really understand a market and the structure of a market. So in LED, for example, you had these channels that had been around for 40, 50 years, maybe longer, built around this core technology, which is basically, you have a ballast, which is like an energy pack that sends energy across some gases that get charged inside of a tube and that light up, right? That's sort of the core. That was the fundamental underlying technology for lighting forever. And then along came, the semiconductor and the blue LED, and how that began to change the whole underlying structure of that market. And so it shifted dramatically. And what I saw was really, it was this whole, really the whole industry migrated from domestic production and overseas production, like in places like Europe or Eastern Europe, to China, like almost overnight, like within 3 to 5 years. It just very rapidly shifted. And then that also shifted the way brands were appearing in the market, because you used to have like there's sort of two major components to the lighting market. There's the lamp and ballast side of the business, parts and pieces, and then there's the fixture side of the business, which is like your housing, right? You're
Mhm.
basically the entire housing. It used to be that you would sell a fixture, and then somebody else would sell lamps and ballast to energize that fixture. But then LEDs came along, and those were all integrated. So all the parts and pieces were integrated into one housing, and then all of the lighting supply, the lighting and lamp business was consolidated to three companies prior to LED. After LED, it was probably also down to three companies again, but all three of those companies were in China, and they didn't really care who they sold to, or what brand you represented in what part of your market. So the lamp business got fractured. Manufacturers began to get really squeezed by that dynamic, and distributors in the end were the ones that won, because they could just sort of sit back, let that game play out, figure out who they liked long term, and choose a winner when the dust settled. The manufacturers, which is where the side of the business that I was on, were the ones like in the trenches fighting and scraping to try to stay alive, keep their business going. And so you could kind of see this trajectory of how like an incumbent or an incoming new technology was going to disrupt the existing structure. And then there's all these other components that technologies that filtered into that market, like lighting controls and IoT, and things that became attached to the light fixture that further, I think, exaggerated that dynamic. So it's interesting to I learned how to think structurally about the structure of a market. Think through who stands to gain, who stands to get squeezed and come under a lot of pressure because of a new technology, and then really wrap strategy around that. Starting with relationships, and then really looking to align our interests with the companies that could help us scale and stay in the fight.
So, I mean, it's to me again, fraught with risk, right? Like you're talking about earlier, where everything, the cost came down, and then you're talking about outsourcing everything, or everything is now being manufactured in China, and not being able to see that trajectory that you talked about, or have that crystal ball. You've done this 4 times, and is there something that you would do now that you would be doing differently in terms of saying, there's no way? Like, is that talking to Tom Quinn and saying, "Hey, listen, Tom, you have a better understanding, you have more holistic or a higher level view," or is it just what you're talking about, knowing about, the different economics, or the global landscape? Like, what can either founders or executives try to glean from your experiences in terms of, hey, no one has a crystal ball, but you have a lot of experience, and so what are some of those things that you could say, hey, listen, if you're going to do this, it's mentorship, it is understanding the market before you dive in. It is like, what are those things that you would recommend to people to kind of cobble together some type of projection?
Yeah, I would say foundationally, uh, understand the structure of the market you're going into, and don't try to fight the structure itself. You can make incremental disruptions in a business, and look to disrupt maybe the way people are doing things, but the structure of the market itself, unless you are sitting on something that is truly transformative, which is pretty rare, you really want to look to figure out how to align your strategy and your business and your revenue model around the existing structure of the market. So look to iterate, but not disrupt the entire structure. That would be one thing. The other thing would be, we didn't do this early enough at the companies that I worked at, which was bringing in, so like in the example of the lighting business, or um, the glazing business, it's like bringing people who are longtime industry veterans who understand the dynamics of the market and sort of what landmines you're about to step on if you go do X, Y, or Z. Having those people in your corner that you can either on your advisory board or up on your payroll are ideal, because they can help you avoid some really costly mistakes that I've seen play out a few times. Um, the other would be really, really, really think hard about the exit strategy and have a number of different options on the table, because exits, man, there was a company that was very similarly built to Lunera, that was kind of like a a cousin to us. They were in the same side of the market. They were a lamp business. They ended up doing it. They were probably one of the very few companies that actually succeeded in that space. They started something that they sold at a good return. It's a company called Green Creative, and their founder, one of their co-founders, Cole Zucker, he and his partner had a really clear strategy. They took on some money, but they were mostly privately held, and they grew organically, and they ended up selling it for a really significant sum of money to them personally as individuals, and to some of the people who joined their team and got options. Lunera scaled up to 40 million and then just went away. And the reason they went away was they they basically realized that as a venture backed company, that this business had turned into sort of like a maybe an ideal lifestyle business, like a private equity funded or private equity style kind of cash flowing business. But it had its promise of providing a multiple on revenue, some kind of big exit to that a venture company is looking for, had long gone, right? It just morphed into like what they would call a zombie business in the venture world, right? Where it's like it's profitable, it's hanging around, but it's not doing anything that's in any way impacting the overall profile of returns in that portfolio. And so they made this bet to try to attach an IoT sensor business onto and sensor strategy onto a light bulb, which was the wrong business, which was the wrong strategy for that business. And they brought in this guy who, had the vision. But he was this like marketing executive who was his personality was all gas and no brake. He was kind of untempered. And so he just spent money recklessly and drove the company off a edge of a cliff financially and ruined this really, frankly, lovely brand we had built in the market and channel. And so that kind of scenario, when I talk about exit strategy and exit planning, it's really important to know like what the expectations of your investors are, how you can meet those expectations, what the exit strategy needs to look like to match that. And then, if your growth profile is venture, where you've got to scale money, you got to scale. It's all about speed and volume of returns versus organic growth, taking less money, going slower, and then maybe you've got more options, I think, for an exit at that point where you can go down the private equity path. You can go down, getting debt and scaling the business that way. Like there's a lot of other levers you can take that give you, opportunities to get cash back as a founder or as an early group of founders and early employees that can be rewarding. And man, if you don't have a clear line of sight on that, it's just inviting destruction in my mind.
So what I'm hearing from you is, on the front end, iterate, don't disrupt, which reminds me of that. I think it was BASF, in the 80s, they had a commercial is that we don't make things, we make things better. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hey, iterate on what is out there. And on the back end, just understand the exit strategy as best you can before jumping in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. It's a line. And when I say iterate, don't disrupt, what I'm really referring to is like structure, market structure. Don't try to challenge market structure. That's where you'll get in trouble. And that's where that company that raised, $2 billion and it's going to transform the glass industry with their smart glass solution. They tried to disrupt the structure of the market and they just got chewed up and spit out. I've seen that a couple of times, and it's terrible for everybody.
Well, on that note, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about Jonathan and the work he's doing, please visit nextenergytech.com. So Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here.